All right. Well, why don't we get this started? Do you want to kick things off, Daniel?
Yeah, I guess. So anyway, the if you notice the title that I put on the space, I didn't mention sponsorly specifically because I think like the conversation should be larger than that, right? It's like I just made something, and if people can love it or hate it, that's not the point. I don't have a personal attachment to that thing. Like that's the way of the future or anything, right? So if it solves an actual problem for library authors, fine. And if it doesn't, I'm happy to kill it and move on. In particular, I think the reason I put GitHub sponsors itself on the title is that this is something that GitHub itself could fix for us. I think they definitely have the payment channel. They have the enterprises in there paying for GitHub Enterprise and getting billed for sponsorships alongside their monthly or yearly bill for their current service with GitHub. So I think, that's one thing that I think is important to acknowledge, that this is a different situation from, say, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So I totally get the folks that share their experience doing open source for 20 years or something. And obviously, I'm not saying that those business models work. Rob here has been doing it for a while, Aaron too, and I'm sure many others. So it's not like I'm here saying, hey, that's the wrong way of doing it. It's just that there's a significant, contextual difference this time around, that some different outcome may happen. That's my
And that's part of the reason I like that you did sponsorly, is that you're pushing a direction that several people have been like, oh, I don't know about that direction, or I don't like that direction. I don't think that's the direction we go. But it's certainly one valid to go explore.
yeah, absolutely. So I know Rob.
And I don't know that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I know Rob.
Well, I just want to say I don't know that GitHub sponsors has to be fixed.
Mm-hmm,
I think what they have is something.
mm-hmm.
I think what we're more looking at, what I've heard is enhance. What more things could be added on top of what we have? Not like replace anything. It's not like anything they've provided thus far are wrong. It's just, hey, there are more opportunities to explore in this space. It'd be great if GitHub. Well,
Yeah. So I think if and that's one of the things that I was sort of hoping that GitHub sponsors would move a little bit faster in terms of adding things that folks are asking for in their discussion. But nevertheless, this is a very complicated problem, so they have to essentially support invoicing and billing everyone pretty much all over the world. So it's a very hard problem. I was kind of surprised that people sort of the first initial reaction was, why don't you just make a company around your product, make it commercial, and that would be super easy. So it's like,
yeah, that's the easy way.
So easy. I love that one of the users who commented on that was from Germany, which has like the most bureaucratic procurement processes on earth. Like that user clearly has no idea what interacting with their own procurement departments looked like. Just that's laughable.
And to be clear, like Aaron and I have both started companies to grow our open source projects in particular directions, and he and I are generally aligned on the view of those things based on conversations we've had over time. And that's why I thought your approach, which is just different from the way that we've gone, which is not suggesting a corporation and licensing and dual licensing, NDAs and support agreements and all that kind of stuff. You're trying to go much lighter weight, which seems reasonable for classes of open source projects. I'd like to see more people go, oh, well, you don't have to dual license. Dual license is the only way. Building a whole support system around a smaller project may not be viable when everybody's like, well, that's the only way to do it. I'd like to see other options for different kinds of projects, even if mine that I spend my time on doesn't happen to be one. So that's one of the things we should push out there a little bit, right?
Yeah, my thinking. So I think in terms of dichotomies pretty often, and unfortunately, I'm gonna have to bring up one here. What I kind of viewed you as trying to do with the sponsor link stuff, Daniel, and basically your sort of whole approach to trying to support yourself with your open source, I kind of look at it as more of like attempting to sort of create a creator economy type thing on open source and GitHub versus starting a company and trying to actually professionalize everything. And I agree with Rob that it's a novel approach worth exploring. Obviously, we've got a lot of feedback from the community on how they received the sponsor link stuff. So I don't want to rehash all that again. But whether or not the sort of sponsorship model is sustainable, I mean, I largely come down on the side of no. Companies need incentives to actually pay for things, and it should be the companies that generate economic value from your work who should be paying for it, and they won't do that unless there's a really powerful incentive for them to do it. And the problem I think that we've talked about over the years with, let's say, open source sustainability, and that the incentive there is like, listen, if you don't support the people who maintain these products that lower your, well, not these products, these open source projects that maintain your total cost of ownership, eventually they're going to burn out, they're going to move on, and you're going to end up with abandonware, which means you're going to either have to end up maintaining a fork, or you're going to have to hope that someone else does. And it's kind of like a boom and bust cycle that happens. You can take a look at projects that people walk away from that are popular, and you can find numerous examples of projects that even super well-funded organizations like Microsoft have abandoned. When they have comparably infinite resources to support. I mean, that's at least sort of what you think, but it's not the reality. So, I generally come down the side of you have to start a company to make an open source library work. But if there's a way to kind of do a creator economy style model around it, where maybe you're being supported by patrons on Patreon or GitHub donations, or something that's, how do I put this, more akin to supporting an individual or supporting, let's say, like basically, like, I kind of think of it more akin to almost like the YouTube model than let's say the corporate model that Rob and I kind of run for our stuff.
So
if that can work.
Yeah. So great, I've got a question for both of you. So one of the reasons why I am kind of pushing towards that second approach of hopefully making it more acceptable for people to think about open source as content and more of a creator economy sort of thing, is that I have the feeling that the moment you go commercial with an open source project, I think, doesn't that become like a cliff of adoption where now people go to your project, see, oh, this is something that is paid, so I'm going to look for other alternatives that are actually non-commercial. So have you noticed any sort of a drop-off significant after you go commercial?
So Rob and I are probably bad examples here because our open source projects are still permissively licensed.
Well,
I don't think either of us have
done
dual licensing.
So neither Aaron nor I have taken the leap to the dual license world, and I don't want to take that leap. I want to believe that we can create a space in here that doesn't require a dual license world that forces it. I accept that my hope may not pan out in the coming years, and that is the only solution. And then if so, then I will confer with Aaron and tell him, Aaron, you have to go up, you have to go that way too. At least that will be that. But I've not made that leap to that dual license world. I do believe a dual license world will have that effect on projects. All right, so there's that. today, the commercialization for my project is you can use it. It's open source. You can participate in it and all that as a normal open source project. If you get to a point where you want guarantees about that project, there is a company you can go to that will provide you guarantees called FireGiant, and we will fix your bugs, we will answer your questions, and all those things on SLAs, on timelines, that just basically guarantees across the board as you expect from software. Where in the project, it's like, oh, I'm embarrassed by that bug, I'll fix it. Or, hey, this bug has been open for 7 years, I can't believe nobody's fixed it yet. And the answer is, of course nobody fixed it. I don't care about it. Nobody else cares about it. Nobody's fixing it. Go away. So, like, that's really simple in the project world. And if someone shows up and says, I can't believe it hasn't been fixed in 7 years, this is really important to us, we are going to go sign up for a support contract to go get this bug fixed because this is impeding our business, then my answer changes completely. I'm like, oh, this is important to you and you want to be a customer? Then that's a different conversation. And that has not affected the project at this point. I also had a lot of some experience in the past where there are a number of companies that are like, we really would like guarantees on Wix. We would like to know that we can depend upon it. And when our company launched, we had a few people show up and say, hey, we're really glad we could finally pay for this. That was preventing us from moving from our previous tooling to this because we just didn't have the guarantee. Now, that is not a common experience. It was kind of like a little speck in the beginning, gave me a little false hope that this is going to be much more straightforward than I thought it was. And instead, it's been a very, very hard drag to get companies. A lot of them are like, it's free. It's been free forever. It's been around forever. Why do I have to pay for anything of it? It's fine, even though you can hear engineers aside going, it'd be really nice we get guaranteed responses, that kind of stuff. So it hasn't affected anything, but I feel the frustration of people going, I want this fixed. Oh, but I don't want to have any relationship to actually being a customer of the project. I just want you to fix it because I use it. So that I 100% identify.
Yeah, and that's one area where I think GitHub itself could offer like an in-issue kind of one-time sponsoring for a specific bug. So if it is really important for them, then just put some money on it, like the bug bounty sort of
I'm
thing,
not
right?
interested in short-term relationships because those are really expensive. The one-off kind of things are really hard to maintain. What we do at FireGiant is we build relationships with our customers, or long-term we build just a knowledge of the way that they work, the way we work, and then again they get that confidence across it. It's not a bug bounty world. But again, I've transitioned to the other side of these are the larger customers that I know we want to have good relationships with them. We maintain relationships with them, and we take care of their needs. Not just random person shows up and says, "I just want this fixed," with no long-term relationship back and forth.
Yeah,
no, go ahead.
Yeah, and that's I think one of the differences between you guys and myself
100%
is it's like I honestly, it's not that I don't care about mock or any other library or NuGet package that I have created, but I'm not entirely sold on the idea that the only way to make a living from open source is by dedicating your whole life to the one project that at some point in time became super popular, right?
So that's actually a question I had for you, Daniels. Are you trying to make mock your sole way of making money, or are you just trying to feel like, I feel like I'm getting benefit from this with the amount that I put into it, a little more balanced than just take, a little bit of give, and then plenty of take, like get that kind of relationship straight up? Or are you trying to go, no, I want to try to make this my only job?
It's a perfectly, reasonable question to ask, because people are sort of questioning my motives here and there.
It's not your motive. I'm just checking your goal. I'm not questioning motives. I'm like, what's your goal? Because there are like the YouTube creator space.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Some of them are just like it's on the side, and some of them it's a business. And the ones where it's a business, you can tell it's different from the ones where it's on the side.
Yeah. So first, as I explained on my blog post on the last from yesterday, is that I really wanted to come up with a new version of mock, like a complete rewrite. And you can see both of the archived repos. That was a ton of work. It was based on source generators, compile time, proxies, and whatnot, super extensible, so that nobody would have to send a PR to mock in order to add some, I don't know, logging or tracing, or a better reporting for invocations and whatnot, right? So that's one thing. I really wanted to work on that, but it was a ton of work. At the same time, like with mock itself, I did a very significant amount of work at the beginning, and then a little bit around V4 when I added link to mocks. But then sort of the project was mostly complete for the needs that I had. And that's something that people, I think, kind of forget. When you do an open source project, at least myself, I do it to solve a problem that I have, right? And then I make it open source because I think, well, if I came across this problem and I found what I think is an elegant solution or useful or productive or, makes things easier for me, well, then why not share it, and maybe somebody else can find it useful too, and whatnot, right? So it's not like every library that you put out, you want to make a business out of it, right? It's and that's the content kind of side of it, and that's why you can see I have like more than 300 NuGet packages, and like 90% of them are not used by anyone, right? So, or by very few people. Yeah, but I do, right? Yeah, absolutely. It's like it's not like I put them out to see if I can make the next big hit like mock, right? It's like I put them out because they're just useful, and I use them myself. So that's important. So my goal is to be able to continue doing that, not having to be too tied to one specific project, and essentially be free to, if now there comes a time where mock is becoming, sort of rusty because there's a lot of new stuff in C# that the current mock doesn't support, like, I don't know, ref structs and ref out and whatever. There are many new things that are not supported there that I did take a stab at fixing with the vNext, and I'm happy to say that I did find ways to make it work. Then I can use the ongoing contributions for my as an individual, right, to actually go and work on that, but not necessarily as a sort of a commitment to an organization that is paying me to actually take care of this, right? Because that goes into, the set up a company and then be liable for whatever you do or don't do on the project, which I think it's a really significant shift from the sort of way that I currently work, which is I do this as a passion kind of thing, and hopefully my passions will align with what people actually find useful, right? And if not, they can just stop sponsoring me, right?
And I think.
And actually, on that note, Daniel, if I could ask a question, thanks for giving me the mic. I don't want to speak full time. I just want to ask a question, but it takes some time to set it up. And I just want to maybe zero in a bit more on the learning process out of all this, because obviously you guys, many of you guys here on this call are maintainers, and you're sharing your knowledge, you're sharing your code, you're sharing a lot of really useful stuff for all the maintainers to come, so to say, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm very curious. I think we all witnessed the buzz that it creates, the backlash that it creates, everything. I think everybody's aware of that. But at the end of the day, it might have been worth it, right? You took one for the team, for lack of a better word. Let's say, you're trying something new, and I think others should, other maintainers who may try something else would probably benefit from the learning that, I think you captured a good chunk of it. In your blog post, in your follow-up blog post, that it really talks about the major themes that occurred on all of that. But I think there's other maybe more quantitative things that we could talk about here, right? And maybe it's not the right time to talk about it. Maybe it's too soon. But if you were to talk about, if you say, well, all this noise happened, but I ended up making 10 times X contributions, financial sponsorships. In that case, another maintainer could say, well, you know what, this actually may be worth it. I'll take the backlash, I'll take all this stuff, and I'll it's really just the learning process. It's similar to decisions that are being made day in and day out on commercial products. You raise the price, you go in it with some kind of modeling in mind, saying, okay, if I raise the price, I'm gonna probably maybe lose some volume, but I'll make it up in margin. So it's really just apply that mindset, because a lot of you guys here obviously are developers. I come from it from more of a business perspective, and just learning a lot in the process. I've learned a lot from your approach here. I've been watching the identity server guys. I've been like other popular reports who are thinking of doing something. So it's really just the learning process that can be captured here for everybody else. So not sure if you can comment on that, really, the more like quantitative way.
Yeah. I think it's a bit early to tell. So there was a lot of noise in the web. So right now I can tell you that if you look at the sponsor badges on the README on the mock project, you can already see that it has 10x. It has 10x on my side, on the monetary side too. Now that said, 10x up from $2 is not something to be super excited about, right? So it's still early, and I don't know how sustainable that is in the long run. So maybe this is a spike just because of all the noise, and people actually learning that I worked on mock even. So that's one thing.
So for me, the reason that this was so interesting is that, one, I saw Sponsorly coming 6-8 months ago when Daniel pinged me on a thing that I was pinging about something else about sustainability. So I was kind of waiting for this thing to hit. And I was waiting for it to hit mock without pushing Daniel in any direction. So I didn't want to do that. For me, I like to see the experimentation in other models than just the dual license or just the corporate way. But I've bought into one of those models, and I'm pushing that model without going dual license, but trying to do the corporate system. I'm experimenting that model, trying to push that one as far as I can until it goes to failure or it goes through to success, and I feel I can stand and say, here is a point that can work for this way. Daniel's pushing another direction, which I like, which is even more. I like the comparison to the YouTube creator economy, like pushing that where you're sponsoring an individual, even separate from a project, which isn't something I had heard Daniel say. I had read in the blog post, but I hadn't heard it. But hearing it crystal clear here is a very interesting idea of, let's sponsor this person because they have done a lot of interesting and useful things in this space. In this conversation between those 2 points, I saw someone say, hey, what Daniel's asking for is for more individuals to participate, where Aaron and I are more on the organization side, and people are like, it's easier to get organizations to give you big money because that's the way they're built up. But someone mentioned that companies give employees learning budgets a lot of times to say, hey, go learn things. So what if they had an open source budget to individuals that would say, go sponsor the people that make your life easier in the communities you participate, where people answer your questions. I recently had a question where someone asked something that was actually turned out to be a deep MS build behavior that I know well because of the deep integrations that Wix toolset has in the MS build. I was able to lay out in a bug report that they blamed for us, which is actually an MS build behavior, that I described the MS build behavior, and they walked away going, I just learned so much about this. Thank you. I have now read all these things, and I've learned all this about MS build. That person could have went back to their organization and said, hey, you know what? This project, I learned from this project. I don't, they're doing something in setup. That's our space. Or they're learning about MS build and other kinds of things. What if there was a space in budgets, an open source budget, I don't know what to name it, in companies that gave individuals to sponsor people that are doing good work in this space? If you look at the open source people, the community people that I'm finding through this whole thing, which is one of the things I hope we learn from, you find all these people that you're like, sponsoring those individuals to continue to do good work, that might be a new thing that we've not even thought about in all of this. So for me, what Daniel's doing and capturing and continuing to push this direction, which I'm glad he's continued to do that despite the slings and arrows, as you put out, is that he's pushing a direction that we haven't tried yet. And I'd like to see more of those, and I hope he continues to document his process as it goes through that, and find more of the open gap spaces here so we can see all the different ways that can work for all different projects.
Sponsoring people thing, Like, I think Patreon is like a model that has been well established in other areas that we want to see this. Like for artists, for example, that like put out continual content, or like other kinds of content creators or podcasts or whatever, it's usually a thing that is used often. Like, what would be like an argument against going like for something like this instead of going for the like GitHub sponsorship model that is also more tied to like the project output and less to like the creative output and in general like content creator output, if you want to think about it this way?
I think GitHub is in better space. GitHub sponsors is closer to the project, so it could do a better job than Patreon, which always feels, even on YouTube, it feels bolted on to the side. But if someone said they're going to do this through Patreon instead of GitHub sponsors, I'd be like, yeah, okay, let's see how it works. To me, it's kind of an implementation detail of the different models of the same thing. Places for GitHub to go explore and maybe get more spaces in this.
Yeah, thanks for your question. That was Ruben, right? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, so I think also that there is a I got a sub kind of or related aspect to Sasha's question, that it is true that when you put out open source code like I did with Mock back in the day, in a way you can also think about that as code that you put out for future maintainers to work on, right? I liked that expression because it really conveys how Mock currently works, and that was part of the at least a few guys commented on that, saying, yeah, why did I do this when there's a currently Dominic, the current maintainer, he has been the guy taking it forward for the past few years. So I want to acknowledge that and say that, yes, that's true. And the sponsorship for the individual that created a project doesn't necessarily solve the problem for the maintainers, and that's absolutely the case here too. So it's not like somebody sponsoring me personally is helping directly or indirectly Dominic, who is working on fixing some bug or whatever, right? So I do think that this is not the only thing that you could do. Definitely that's where GitHub itself could, allow you to one-off sponsor specific bugs, and then whoever fixes it gets the bounty, and that takes care of the maintainer side of it. But at the same time, I think folks have to be realistic. Someone who is maintaining a project and maybe merging a PR or maybe even sending a PR doesn't necessarily have the time, the bandwidth, the passion, or the ability to actually work on massive new features, let alone a complete rewrite or come up with the next big thing, right? So those are separate things in the end, I think. So that's another aspect where the creator side of things should be sort of I think accounted for separately. So yes, you can sponsor the individual that created the project. That doesn't mean that gives you sort of an expectation that he will be fixing any little thing that comes up, because that can, as a learning experience, but also as an ongoing kind of maintenance issue for the project, can be handled by somebody else. So that's the part where I'm kind of going in a different way from Rob and Aaron. Is like, I don't think the one who created the project necessarily has to be the one actively maintaining it forever and charging companies for it and whatnot. So it's kind of like a balance, I guess.
But it's the difference between sponsoring an individual versus sponsoring a project, right?
Yeah, and currently GitHub sponsors allows you to sponsor individuals, not projects. Right. So yeah, that's another. Yeah,
that feels like a space.
If I can make a counter argument here briefly. Mm-hmm. By the way, I had to rejoin. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, good. If I can make a counter argument here, and this is why, despite my open source participation, even outside of Akka.net, I've contributed to other projects over the years, why I don't accept sponsorships, and what I think kind of the problem with it is, and how the creator economy sort of analogy doesn't necessarily work kind of one-to-one. In the software space, we're not making art or entertainment or basically things that are, and forgive me for saying this, non-functional. We're making functional things that actually generate business value for companies typically. That's not true of every open source project. There are certainly some that are much more entertainment driven and are much more kind of aligned with that sort of creator economy type spirit. But for all intents and purposes in this conversation, we're kind of talking about more brass tacks type stuff. The reason why I don't accept sponsorships for me personally is because it's not really clear what I'm getting if I'm, let's say, buying a sponsorship or if I'm selling one. Whereas I sell, let's say, support plans, or we sell commercial add-ons that have very cut and dried SLAs behind them, right? If you pay this much, you get this much amount of our organization's time, and our time will be spent on the following activities, patching bugs, reviewing code, reviewing logs, that type of stuff. I think that basically you've got kind of two models you can pursue if you want to go down this creator economy road. The first is toss a coin to your maintainer, where companies basically are essentially just kind of setting up open source funds as a means of being able to go ahead and support projects whose work they depend on without expecting any sort of direct benefit out of it. And there's some very forward-thinking companies like Microsoft and Uno and Indeed are some examples I can think of who've done this historically. But the issue there is there's just not very many of them. On the flip side, coming back to the quote, you need to start a company, unquote argument, there's the idea of selling sponsorships in exchange for value, where really you're just kind of using GitHub as a payment platform, not necessarily as a quote sponsorship or patronage type relationship, but it's more transactional, where you're selling, in exchange for this monthly, let's say, sort of commitment, and you agree to maintain this commitment for, let's say, 12 months or whatever, I will be available to triage any, tier 1 support issue that you run into in this stretch of time. And that'll be available to you as an option that you have in perpetuity, where now you're back to selling something that's a little bit more like a support plan per se. That's the business I'm in. And that's why I won't accept sponsorships or other stuff that kind of looks like that, is because I want to keep the delineation and sort of the, let's say, boundaries between me, our open source users, and our actual paying customers as sort of clear as possible. That's a decision that I think every person who gets into open source and starts looking at, gets a project that's popular and starts thinking, wow, I have to spend quite a tremendous amount of effort doing this, and unless I'm get to give up time I would spend doing other things like being with my kids or craft brewing, whatever floats your boat, either I'm going to give up time to do that, to work on this, in exchange for maybe getting some visibility in the community. Maybe I can parlay that into getting a job. If you're someone who's already got a popular open source library and you're already super visible, that doesn't really help. So you got to make a decision on, do I want to just throw it out there and see if developers will try to support me just because they appreciate the work that I do, or am I going to try to sell products and services? I think it comes down to every individual to decide what they want to spend their time doing. You can do that without necessarily having to form a big company. But yeah, go ahead.
I think there's we have. Let me give the floor to Egil Hansen. He has to speak.
Yeah,
so
go ahead.
Egil Hansen, I just made you a speaker. Go ahead.
Can you hear me, everybody?
Yep.
Yeah, perfect.
Great. Okay. Yeah. So I'm Egil Hansen, creator of BUnit. So much smaller download count than most of you guys here on the what do you call this, a stream. something. Yeah, I did want to jump in with a small observation, which I think is relevant for this conversation. So the current open source contract that is between the creators, maintainers of products, and users of them is, as many have pointed out in the recent days, a very, no guarantees asked and no guarantees given. Like everybody can, now if the open source maintainer can go away and nobody can, drag them into court and force them to do stuff. And likewise, open source maintainers can't, demand compensation because that's really the contract that is. And in some ways, I think many open source maintainers, while I guess most of us would like to get a little bit of more, recognition for what we're doing, it's also a good arrangement for us because you can't, like, if you go into the, start up a business, set up all of that, which I think you've argued, many of you today here, that is not just something it's not a one form thing and then you're done. But now you also have responsibilities. You kind of have to go all in or nothing. Whereas the open source approach does allow you to have a very low commitment while still getting some benefits. So I do like the idea of going into the creator kind of approach to it, looking at it from creator point of view. And I do see some possibilities that GitHub and other central organizations in our space look at as well. Most of them are Microsoft owned, really, at least in the .NET ecosystem, are able to set up something where there is a way to have that silent passive income. And when and if you manage to get lucky enough to hit a certain number of, a big enough success with an open source product, where you actually have the ability to quit your job and, like the, YouTube channel that hits a certain number of subscribers, they have a possibility of actually starting to do it professionally, as it were. I think that is something where we as open source developers and maintainers can transition into that. I don't think everybody, I think most people are actually quite happy open source developers wise to be able to just sit and do your open source for fun. And if it becomes a success, maybe get a little bit of money out of, maybe get a little bit of recognition, other advantages, but don't have the commitment of actually being a business that somebody can, hold to the fire if things starts going wrong. So in some ways we want to have our cake and eat it too. But so yeah, I think that's my 2 cents on this. And can I just say I'm really happy in some ways that some of this has happened. I know it's not been a fun thing for you, Daniel, but in the last 2 days, my sort of thinking of this has adjusted slightly, and I think become much more nuanced with all the input and comments being shared online and things like this. So thank you everybody involved in that, and spreading the word and making bringing awareness around open source and sustainability to the front again. So thanks for that at least.
Yeah, thanks a lot for speaking up.
So he brings up a number of interesting things there. One, I can see the perspective from smaller projects, like that outlook from smaller projects makes a lot of sense to me, and one that I don't think we talk about a lot in that space to make it possible. And definitely in the creator space, like what you've talked about, Daniel, I'd love to see more experimentation in place, especially for that passive income kind of thing. Just, hey, I've been helped because I've done this good, I've done this project. There is a place when you get to, your project becomes super critical on business path. And this happened to me because I started my project because I believed in it. I believed this is the right way to do software installation and things like that. And it grew and grew and grew to the point, and I was employed by Microsoft while doing that. And so it grew and grew and grew where I would have companies outside Microsoft say, I would like to use this. I understand why this is a better way to solve my problem. I just don't have the guarantees to move to it to make it business critical. And so that concept there is a switch where your project switches to business critical, and you start thinking, oh, maybe I do build a business. And that's a good point. But you have to also, I think, recognize that not all open source projects
are on a path to becoming that sort of a critical
Absolutely.
thing. Like
Absolutely.
like Mockio, there's no way on earth that any unit testing or mocking or library is ever going to be part of a critical infrastructure on a company, right?
No, you've proven that's not true, Daniel, because you have so many people out there saying you have added an enormous amount of work to my company. We may miss dates and all this stuff, all because of this. And those people all have internal problems. That's their problem, that they got into that situation, right? That's on them.
That's all okay. Yeah, but that's all nonsense, because you can always, pin the version you're using, stay there. There are no, like honestly, there isn't a single new feature in Mockio over the last, say, 10 years that I really felt that I needed to use that prevented me from staying in, say, Mock 4.0 even. Right?
In this situation, Daniel, I totally agree in this one, but imagine there's a shift in the .NET framework where suddenly Mockio is broken and it needs a fix and it needs to go forward, right? That's a different space. That's my point. It's just there is a space. It's not this one. You're right. It's not this one, but it could be. And their lack of recognition that is the problem, that they have this pinpoint need that has large impact on their business, and they don't recognize it, and they've done nothing to make sure that they can handle that, is their problem. And I'm not saying that, Daniel, you've now become business critical, which you clearly have, therefore you should go create a business. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that maybe you could, because you clearly became business critical, so you could do that. I made the choice to leave Microsoft and start a business because I wanted to take my project to the next level, and to do that, I believe I needed to create a business. It is not. I do not say every project should even aspire to be that. If your project becomes that, or maybe you want your project to be that, fine, you can work that direction. Aaron and I have lots of experience. We could talk about those things. I like the space that you're operating in, where you're like, yeah, it's business critical, but I don't even care. Like, not my problem. I think that's a fantastic place to be in. Those people need to think about what that means. Maybe it's, let's keep Daniel happy by creating a space in between what Aaron describes as there's no business value, therefore business won't do it. Maybe we can get to a place where people go, you know what? Let's fund open source developers that are doing good things. And let's make it small, maybe, to keep it simple around that. I forgot, you had like 300 comments or more. I didn't even look at the GitHub issues. But like, I was trying to do, off top of math, but if those are all companies and they all were like giving $100 across those 300, you have a large chunk of money coming in, even just yearly, that you could go, you know what? I like where Mock is going. I get a lot of benefit from this. I will go spend more time in it. If the culture was in such a space where the company said, that's a good thing to do, it would change the way that maintainers could potentially act in their projects. Like, oh, yeah, you know what? I will spend more time on it. This is adding value, and I'm recognized for that value. We're not creating an opportunity for that to exist in our space.
Yeah, and I think the it's not only about a specific project. It's like folks have argued that and there was a question even earlier about sponsoring a project rather than an individual or an organization, as it may be. And I think that's an area where people have to recognize that if I am ever going to come up with something remotely even as cool as Mock, I have to be able to work on other things too, right? So as part of the Mock vNext, for example, I did work on that compile time generated proxy framework sort of thing, which is not entirely related to Mock, right? It's a lower layer, but I wouldn't be able to work on that if all my commitment meant was that I have to fix issues and iterate slowly on the current Mock, right?
Yeah, this is the thing I want to see us experimented. I hear your concern. I'd like to see us in a space where we can experiment and see what happens.
We have 2 requests for speaking.
Well, that's good. I have to run, Daniel. I told you I have to go pick up my daughter, but. This is. I love that you started the conversation and you forced a particular direction. I love it. I absolutely love it, and I'm very curious to see how far you push that and what other things show up in the gap around that. And I hope it helps flush out a little bit of user entitlement that we can start tackling that point. well.
Thanks a lot for your support.
I'll come back and check out the recording.
Thanks for joining.
Thanks,
yeah, bye-bye. Okay,
hello.
go ahead. Hello.
Totally other question, in fact. So I was doing mobile applications, and I was selling books, for kids, in BlackBerry store. So I gave for free books, which contain 5 pages, but I also sold the same book with extras as 10 pages. Yes. So last page of my free app was saying, if you like my content, please buy the extended version. And to be honest, I don't know how to do that in open source. Yeah, because what I'm saying, for example, there is IOC library, and some of the features use the only, for example, the enterprise, so they can afford it. There are, I know. So yeah, this is the question: how you guys would approach such thing? Because it's in fact, as a creator, want to deliver some content which is for free and to be publicly used. Yeah, and I also don't think that enterprise shouldn't pay. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. So I think there's the dual licensing thing is something that you can do there. It's like you can say, okay, this is free for individuals and other open source projects, and it's paid if you are a company or are making more than, say, this or that amount of money. So that's one way that it has been solved already. So yeah. So we got Tom too. So and Jeff comes next. So Tom, go ahead. Tom.
Sorry,
All right.
I didn't hear you when you were calling me out. Yeah, I just wanted to point out as a maintainer myself is people always talk about money donations, but something that is also very valued is engineering donation, having people help you contribute to the project, because if you don't want to monetize the project, then you still have all the work there, but instead of asking for things, proposing and contributing is often more valuable than giving money to grow the project. Of course, you need both because you have infrastructure. Maybe you want to make a job out of it, but giving code contributions is also super valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yep. And Jeff, I think.
Yeah, so thanks. I've been kind of lurking, listening. I always appreciate what Aaron and Rob and folks have to say. And Daniel, just want to say thanks for helping us all talk about this. I know on the Microsoft side, there's been some rant emails sent around. I think a lot of us are trying to get on the same page. How do we think about sponsorship? And all these things come up. Are we wanting to just shotgun money out to people? Do we want to give money to individuals? We've tried things like this FOSS fund where we honestly have trouble giving projects money because they often don't want the money for tax reasons. And other people, other teams at Microsoft happily will spend $400,000 on some special essentially dual license situation to get a commercial license for something. And I'm just amazed at how many people are so new to open source, but yet we're all struggling with this on how do we sponsor things? How do we make the right things happen? And I think something Rob was talking about earlier was, what if companies let anyone use like GitHub sponsors or training budget to go, send $500 to a project here or there? I definitely want to try all those things. And, again, I'm mostly speaking for myself here, but I think the hardest thing we run into is really how do you think big as a corporation that runs on this fiscal schedule? I can make an amazing pitch to go get funding this year, And at the end of June next year, in June 2024, that funding is probably going to go away. And sometimes you can get a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less. But like, it's so hard to, I think, help some of our leaders understand, what's the business impact, to use the words they like to use. What is the impact of this?
Yeah.
And what are we doing? And so I love the conversation. I struggle so much on this. I was on a call with Dwayne O'Brien yesterday. He started the FOSS Fund initially, and I think we've learned a lot, but it's surprisingly hard for us to give small amounts of money to a lot of things because big companies are hard. So mostly just saying thanks. Thanks for starting the conversation and continuing it. And I also know this has been going on for years. I really don't know what we're supposed to do as an industry. It does feel like we're at a turning point, though.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And you make a very a great point with regards to the FOSS fund from Microsoft. I think, the Microsoft definitely, I think, is one of the ones thinking and actually doing something, at least trying things around. And that's why I think the opportunity here is quite unique, because now we have, under a single company roof, so to speak, we have both GitHub, Microsoft, Visual Studio Code, NuGet.org. So there's a lot of pieces of the puzzle that now can get some traction, because this is not some committee that has to agree on something over years of meetings and conflicting interests. So I think really there is an opportunity to kind of do something different this time around.
Yeah, I'll definitely agree with there's opportunity there. If it's not years of meetings and committees, though, I do think we have a lot of that.
Yeah, for sure. And some folks kind of there are indirect benefits to working on an open source project, and I definitely get that. Folks assume that just because you did an open source project that became super popular, then somehow you become sort of a celebrity, and people are going to be asking for autographs on conferences and offering you jobs and whatnot. And over the years, it's kind of funny, because over the years, it's like I never made a dime with Mock. I didn't even get as much as a job offer or anything. So it's kind of like, if you think about, let's say, James Newton King, right? He now works at Microsoft, working on the great JSON implementation they have, and so on. So for someone looking at the outside and saying, okay, is this open source thing something that is worth doing? Well, if you think the only two paths for that are you become an employee of some company that will now pay you to do the same thing like 10 years down the road, or you have to set up your own company and do the really non-trivial work around building up a customer base and the support and the strings attached and all that, then it becomes less attractive than if you could do it as for fun at the beginning, just like most YouTubers and streamers and content creators around who start doing it for fun, and then at some point the revenue starts coming in, and then you get more time to continue doing it for fun. So I do open source for fun, so people should understand that. It's like that's my main thing. I don't do it to milk people into giving me money, because otherwise I would have done it like a decade ago. So just some perspective there.
Yeah, I also wanted to call out that our industry is changing by laying the foundation. If you have a look at 5 or 10 years ago, nobody even knew what their dependencies were, because there was no insights on it. But now it's integrated on various levels, be it on GitHub, be it on the NuGet CLI, be it anywhere. You can just say, which ones am I using? NPM has the nice needs funds feature, and hopefully that will come to NuGet as well to help surface that, not only to fund projects, but also to have a better security story, which is a nice byproduct, or let's say additional benefit of this whole insights thing. As a company, what is our biggest dependency and which ones are the biggest risks?
Yep. We have Eddie. Go ahead. Eddie Joe or something like that.
Hi, Daniel. I just caught the end of that as I was coming up on stage. Did you call Eddie Jout? Is that me?
Okay, great. Yeah, go ahead.
Perfect. I mean, great discussion, everyone. Really, really interesting. I've been listening for a short while. And I'm massively into open source. For those who don't know me, I work on it full time. And I recently just finished the GitHub Accelerator, which was, super interesting. So it's great to see, GitHub trying to make open source, projects more sustainable. But yeah, it's still hard. I think there must have been like 15 or so projects on the GitHub Accelerator, and you got to see like different types of projects, some from platforms, some from libraries, some frameworks, all the rest. And the making it sustainable and how we do it with GitHub sponsors and even beyond that, the different models, you can definitely see that we're all struggling with similar sort of challenges. And it is changing, as people have mentioned. I think it's super interesting that people are becoming more aware that we've got a lot of these projects underpinning bigger projects and platforms, and they need, and it can't just be done on the evenings and weekends, and work-life balance is super important. So I think things are changing, but yeah, I would like to see them change a bit faster, because I do see so many projects where people have to work like every spare minute or choose between catching up on notifications. I know this is a problem I have, is catching up on notifications or taking a break and or spend time with family. And that if you take a break, like, I don't know, this weekend, that next time you work on it, be it Monday for me or the following weekend for somebody else, that you're going to have twice as much to go through, and then you end up with conflicts, and therefore the work kind of almost doubles. So it is really, really hard. And money, I think, does help. It's not, as someone mentioned, having skills is really important, because we don't all know everything, and having people with other skills on the project was super, super helpful. But I do see that there are so many benefits to contributing to open source. I always mention this, so I'll just keep it really short and sweet. But we get to improve our technical skills, we get to improve our core skills, our communication, our collaboration, and stuff. So there's so much benefit there. But yes, I think at the end of the day, to have some monetary benefits as well, especially for the people who do dedicate so much time and effort to these to open source, I think is important. And I'd love to hear from others on what works for them and what doesn't. I mean, we were trying out a few things on our open source projects, and I'm more than happy to share a bit more about that, of what's working, what isn't, and what we're trying. If anyone wants to know, just let me know.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I think the sponsoring thing, unless it's integrated into more and more places in the developer experience, it may end up being just like Patreon, right? Something that is, you see an icon there that says, hey, please donate to me, and then nobody does. And so that's why I wanted to kind of bring the sponsor link experience into the IDE, so that it's something that is visible to you. You can argue whether being, in additional to being visible, being annoying is a good thing or a bad thing. But bringing it closer to where you are working all day, because a lot of folks actually, didn't even realize that they could sponsor me. So, and I think that's a problem also in general. It's like, unless you go looking into their GitHub repo and or social networks and whatnot, maybe you don't even realize that a library that you just installed via NuGet happens to be a library that is seeking sponsorships. So,
well, a couple of takeaways for people who are working in open source, and let's set aside. Everyone's made some really good points on various monetization models and.
I think I lost audio.
I can hear you.
Okay, so I think we lost Aaron. So we have a few more folks here who haven't spoken yet. Let's see, Tobias or Tobias. Do you want to chime in?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, perfectly.
So first of all, thank you for letting me speak, and let me take a minute to appreciate all the people here who have done countless contributions to open source. As a person who's kind of sitting on both sides of the fence, I both have a real-world job where I work for a company called Novo Nordisk, and we engage with various companies that provide open source services. And I've also, in my past free time, helped sort of spearhead the, I don't know, revival of a defunct blockchain network. And what I can see is that what's really seems to be lacking here is the effective monetization of reward versus effort, right? And I think while I don't necessarily like the way that the current crypto economies work, because they lack regulation and transparency and all of that, I do feel that when I started out this Terra Rebel recovery effort for Terra Classic, when we started out, the market would pump like $1 billion valuation all of a sudden based on literally nothing. And before I knew what to do with it, I had 80 plus developers from all over the world knocking on my Discord, calling my phone like, hey, is there some way that we can somehow help do this? And I can't help to feel that if we look at open source as play to earn, basically, we already have a commit-based system where you can sort of say that's kind of a bounty program, right? Because you're solving problems with the commits if they pass the pull request. So I can't help to think that there must be a way to create a balanced digital economy using decentralized identifiers and so on, where people basically have an economy around these ecosystems, where companies are enticed to buy tokens if they want enterprise services, which in turn will entice the developers to contribute more because they see the values of their efforts increasing. And I know there's lots of tricks in this, but having been through the experience, I can't help to think that that might be a more efficient way than the current one, where on the one side I have to put pressure on a middle where a contractor like Grafana, because their OSS stack on Mimir doesn't support managed identities in Asia, right? And they're kind of helpless because they have to convince the developers to do that and fix Thana so it works. And on the other side, I see all of these developers, running into crypto if they see a profit opportunity, spending months of their time just writing code, trying to solve problems. So I can't help to think that maybe we can learn something from that. And then also thank you for hosting this space. So that was all I had to say.
Yeah, thanks a lot for chiming in. So yeah, you make a very valid point. I think there's a non-trivial correlation to make between the value of a commit, say, or a pull request, and the actual amount of work put behind it. So I think that that's something that is not easy to sort of calculate. So folks may go and say, oh, but why should we sponsor you if you haven't committed this amount of lines of code or whatever to the project and so on. So I think that's one area, without getting into the whole blockchain or crypto or tokens or whatever, where the value that a given bug fix brings to the project is in the eye of the user who is facing that bug or shortcoming of the project. So you may think that a one-line change isn't worth more than, say, $5, but if the company that is facing that bug thinks it's worth $1,000, then so be it. So that's why I don't think this is something that can be easily automated or even calculated outright, and it's something that should be an explicit vote with your money on issues and pull requests, say, on the GitHub side, as far as open source goes. So yeah, at least that's what I think should go. Anyway, folks, we're over an hour, I think. We talked a lot about all sorts of topics. So we have Egil, then Feora, I think. Sorry for mispronouncing. If you guys want to add some last or closing thoughts or questions, I think we could begin to wrap up.
Sure, I can go first, if I may. So I think my biggest wish for GitHub, a new feature there, would be a way for companies to have a one-click option of setting up what Jeff, I think, referred to as maybe a open source fund, and have that more or less automatically distributed across whatever open source they're using in some way or capacity. So right now, that is sort of something they have already. They have a way for you to go in and actually download a list of all the open source that you're using based on analysis of your projects. And then you get a CSV file, and then you can, adjust whatever you want there, and you can re-upload it and automatically sponsor things. I would like that to be even more easy, because that at least remove the barrier for companies to get into this. It's fairly easy for us developers, individual persons, to go and click on the sponsor button of Daniel or somebody else we like to sponsor. But for companies, it's a bit more involved, and there's a lot of maybe internal politics. Who do we sponsor? Who do we not sponsor? So having sort of an easy way for them to get going with that, I think that might at least open up to all of the companies who wants to do the right thing, but it's simply too big of a hurdle to actually get going with that. So they just don't. So that's my wish for all the Microsoft people and related people here on the stream that are listening in. If you can make that happen, that would be great.
Yeah. I think there's a tricky side of that, which is when you do static analysis of all the projects you're using and which references they have, that doesn't tell you a lot about which of those are actively being used. So you can measure by repo activity and essentially sort of discard the ones that are archived or don't have any commits recently and so on. So it is something that could be done statically. The way I envisioned a sponsor link is it runs in the editor so that that this is something that is actively being used by a developer at that precise point in time. So if you had, say, some telemetry associated with that, then as a company, you could easily say, okay, what are the projects that we are actively using this month? Okay, it's this 10, and 80% was that one, and 2% was that one, and then make that split on a sponsorship kind of thing, which is sort of like a Spotify sort of subscription model that GitHub sponsors could offer, and tie into some sort of telemetry that would effectively do the split more or less automatically. But I think a combination.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
It exists, Daniel. I think there's at least a good chunk of it exists today. It's called thanks.dev. So if you check that out, you'll see the analysis of dependency and how much you want to donate and all of that. And just to reflect on some of the bounty models that were mentioned, I think the initial contribution is just one aspect of the work that's involved in getting the contribution accepted. So one way or the other, there's still maintaining, reviewing all of that work, accepting it and maintaining it forward. While the bounty can work to kind of fix the immediate need, the maintainers are still under the gun for maintaining. So it's I don't think it solves everything.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, I just opened that thanks.dev, and sounds interesting. Yep. Okay, so I think we can sort of wrap up now. We did cover a lot. Thanks everyone for joining. I definitely love the feedback and putting this out. Hopefully, as a community, I don't speak for any community, I just speak for myself. I think everybody should know that. I'm not open source expert or whatever. I'm just a developer doing open source from Argentina. So thanks a lot for joining, and hopefully this conversation will result in something down the road. Most definitely, I think the agreement overwhelmingly is that the status quo isn't great. So I think that's at least healthy. Not that I misunderstood a completely healthy and awesome community by just sheer lack of understanding and experience. So yeah, there's that. So thanks a lot, and I hope to continue talking on the web and chat and X and whatnot. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.